church family, and I'm guessing I see some very familiar faces here that have known me for a long time. And they're probably like me, that they never thought that they would hear me up here talking about the destruction of my past and what got me here today. But I'm here, and I'm joyful. I'm really, really joyful. I'm happy. And I'm really happy to be here today. Now I want to tell you a little bit about myself. My name is Joel Carlson. I'm a felon. I'm a fraudster. I'm loved. I'm forgiven. I'm redeemed. I'm a cheater. I'm humble. And I'm blessed. And I couldn't be happier. I couldn't be happier to be here today. But I got here for a purpose. I got here for a pretty significant reason. And I want to share with you my story and what got me here. You know, there's a story that my father used to tell, and he used to be a minister, and he loved telling this story as part of his sermons. When I was about 8 years old, my dad was pastoring a church in Chicago at the time. And I guess I sat down with him one day, and Dad had that normal conversation with me that dads have with sons, and he said, "Hey, Joel, what do you want to be when you," or they called me Joey back then, "Joey, what do you want to be when you grow up?" And, you know, I kind of probably went through the normal firefighter, policeman, you know, that kind of stuff. And we talked about that for a while. And my dad, being this 40-year-old man, kind of thinking he had his career lined up and that he knew what he was going to do, I turned the tables on him. And I said, "Dad, what do you want to be when you grow up?" At 40 years old, I asked him that question. And he always kind of thought about that and turned it into a sermon about, what do you want to be when you grow up? Well, I'm guessing that when I was 8 years old, I didn't say that I wanted to grow up to be a felon, or be a crook, or be an adulterer, or be a cheater. I also probably didn't say that when I grow up I want to be a great father, a wonderful husband, an honest man of integrity. I should have done that. You know, I wasn't that for a while. I wasn't a good father. I wasn't a loving husband. I was definitely not a man of integrity. But that's all changed, because back then I strived to be successful, wealthy, admired, looked up to, be on top of that pedestal. No more. I've had a change of heart. I understand what it is to be successful today, to what it is to be accomplished. And it's a lot different than what I used to believe. So I actually grew up in a family that was pretty, what you would say, normal. A great loving mom and dad. They cared a ton about me. They loved me deeply, loved my sister deeply. We had a great relationship. Very normal, active home, very church-going. The one thing about my family, specifically my mother, and when I talk about my parents and when I say things that might sound negative, it's not because they were negative overall, but these are the things that influenced me. My mother was very, very image conscious. She wanted to look good. That was just the way she was. And everything she did, she wanted to look really, really good. And I think my mother had some insecurities that really drove that, and I can really relate to that. Good example is that we had a home. We lived in San Diego for quite a few years. And we had a home there, beautiful home, kind of at the bottom of a canyon. And it was nice size, a good home for California. And on the exterior, it looked great. But what a lot of people never knew is that there were 3 rooms in that house that never got furnished. My folks kind of ran out of money. They couldn't afford to furnish their own home. On the outside, it looked great. But on the inside, it was kind of empty. It's a great transition into my life. On the outside, I tried to look really, really good. But internally, I was breaking down. I was falling apart. And that's what my mom was too. She really, really wanted to look the best. And I took notice of that. And I thought, I need to do everything I can to be successful, to look good. And so I grew up. I went through high school. We moved to Minnesota. I graduated from Mounds View High School. Had a great time there. And then I went to Bethel University. And I was on track here. Graduated with a business degree and thinking I had life ahead of me. And I decided to go to seminary. But I was going to take a year off of school, get a job, and then I was going to go back to seminary because I really, really wanted to be a chaplain. That's what I wanted to do, was be a chaplain. I took that year off, which was a huge mistake. But ended up starting to date a girl. We ultimately got married, but I took a job at a company called Arden Fasteners. Many of you Calvary people probably know Arden Fasteners. And I loved that job. And I worked there for 3 years. I moved up into sales, and I just loved that job. And I think I was pretty good at it, too. I loved to sell and do that business. But there was this other business waiting for me. My mom had a financial advisory firm, an investment firm, right here in Roseville. And she was looking for someone to take over because she wanted to retire at some point. She had done very well in the business. And she had kept talking to me about going into the business with her. And I was interested, but I was more interested in the fact that I could make a lot of money, that I could do really well, because I really wanted to be successful. And I thought that going into a business like that was the only way that I could achieve that goal. So I left a company that I absolutely loved, and I went into a field of business, and I did this for 16 years, and I hated my job. I hated my job. I was good at it, but I hated it. I was good at selling, I should say. I wasn't really good at investments. I don't know much about the stock market. I know how to sell. But I hated it. I dreaded going to work every day. But I thought that was the only way I could, first of all, make enough money, and second of all, make sure my mother could retire and do what she wanted to do. I was thinking about other people and not caring for myself. But boy, did I love that high life. I loved making that money. I loved buying things, having the bigger home, having the better car, having the country club. All those things. Man, Joel was getting put up on this pedestal. Joel volunteered at Calvary. He did everything at Calvary. He was on the elder board. He worked in kids' ministries. He worked with Operation Christmas Child. He did everything he could to look good. But Joel was breaking down inside because he wasn't really being who he was. He was a fake. But he was playing it off as well as he could. So I did that job for 16 years. My mom and dad retired in 2005. And I had a couple of really, really good years. Really good years. And I spent a lot of money. Accumulated a lot of debt. And I kept all of that from my wife. I didn't tell her anything about our debt, how much trouble we were in financially. I just figured if she had a credit card that worked and cash in her wallet, she was going to be fine, and she didn't have to know anything else. And I would get us through this somehow. But we all know what happened in 2008. Our stock market took a dive. My income in 2008 dropped 75% into 2009. 75%. But I kept on living that high life. I didn't change one bit of our lifestyle. I was so arrogant, so prideful, that I chose that I got to find a way to live up to this standard, because that's what people expect out of me. That's what I thought. Well, no money's coming in, but I've got all this money of clients' investments that are sitting there waiting for me to do something with. So over a period of 3 years, and 13 victims, and $1.3 million, I siphoned from them to me. Made it seem like it was some kind of investment, promised them a certain return over a period of time, took the check, put it right in my bank account, and used it for my own living. I didn't use it for a yacht or a private plane or anything like that. I literally used it just to keep us living the life that I wanted us to live. That was all. And it was incredibly wrong. And I know that. And I paid a severe price for it. What happened then in 2006, 2007 is I joined a country club up here. I love to golf. Golf is just my passion. I love doing it. But I also found out golf also allows me to do a lot of drinking. And I love drinking and I love golfing. And when I drank a lot, when I drank more, I golfed better. And the one thing I recognize is back in those days in 2006, before things collapsed on me, that I really enjoyed what it felt like to be drunk, to be buzzed. It kind of took me out of my insecure self and made me more confident. And so when those good days were happening, I just drank and had so much fun. I was the life of the party. And then when the market crashed and I was starting to steal from my clients and making bad choices and being a bad husband and and an absent father, I just went straight to the bottom because I knew that was the only place I could escape and feel good about who I was. My drinking increased to what I would call a daily drunk, or at least a very daily excessive drinker. Never drank at work, but as the investments started to come into my account, as I was making more and more decisions, my hours at work really started to decrease. I found myself at the bar at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Of course, I was going out to a client meeting. And I would stay at the bar till about 6, and I would drink quite a bit and get myself into a state of delusion where I would be able to figure out, okay, Joel, if this happens and this happens, everything's going to be okay. And I believed my lies. I believed that all these good things would happen. That's why I just kept drinking. I'd get home about 6:30, have dinner with my kids and my wife, and then I'd find some kind of excuse to go back out. And I'd drink and drink some more. And this was a pretty consistent pattern in my life for a few years. In 2010, I'd already been making really bad decisions. And I was at a birthday party with my family, and over at my niece's, for my niece's 3rd birthday, I believe it was. My mom and dad were there, had just come home on a trip from St. Martin. And my wife and I had just left. We were going to head to church. And I got a call saying that something was wrong. My mother was in mid-sentence talking to a friend of hers there, talking about how wonderful it was to be with her kids and to be home from this great trip. Mid-sentence, she said, "What's happening to me?" She grabbed her throat and she fell back in the chair, and pretty much she was dead on the spot. She had had a massive brain aneurysm, and she was gone. My mother was a wonderful, wonderful woman. And this tragedy just hit us to the core, and it hit me at the worst time in my life. I was falling apart at work. I was falling apart at home. And now my mother was gone. She was my rock. My father was left without his wife, and he was unable to really handle things, so I helped him with his finances and sort of take over his life for him. And we'll get back to him in a minute. Ultimately, in 2012, everything came crashing down on me. My wife at the time and I were sitting on a beach in Hawaii. We had just been at a destination wedding, a trip we could not afford, but we still went because I had to look good. I got a call, and on that area code on that caller ID was a 602 area code. 602, I believe, is Phoenix, and I knew that that was not going to be a good call because that was the home office of my broker who managed my business to make sure I was doing the right thing. I let that call go through a couple times. I didn't want to answer because I knew what was coming. Finally, I answered, and on the phone was the chief compliance officer, the chief legal counsel, and someone else, and they said, "We have 2 clients that are calling wondering where their money is. Can you tell us?" And I lied and lied and lied about it. "No, it's probably here. You know, I'm in Hawaii." "Oh, we know you're in Hawaii, Joel. And we're going to have our compliance people there on Monday when you get back." I got back to the office. They pretty much raided my files. 2 days later, I resigned from my business, and 3 months later, I was barred from the industry of financial services for the rest of my life. I could no longer do that ever again. And I knew that an indictment was coming down at some point. And at this point, I was home without a job, massive debt. My wife, knowing that my career was over, but didn't know that we were in such bad shape, because I made her to think that we were fine financially. And she said, "Well, we're going to go to Michigan," which is where we had a summer home at the time. She said, "You're coming with, because I'm not going to leave you at home. But if you drink once more, I'm sending you to treatment." Well, I made it about 3 weeks in Michigan, and then I started drinking again. I drank on the golf course of all places and almost fell over trying to tee off. And my buddy turned me in, and my wife had said, "Joel's really drunk." So she said, "You know the deal, you're off to treatment." And I fought it, and finally she sent me to a detox center in Chicago. And while I was in Chicago, she uncovered everything. Our debts, all my failures, everything that I had done. She uncovered the whole thing. I spent a week in detox. I almost died, I was told. I was in such bad shape. They wouldn't even admit me into detox for 3 days because I was in such rough shape. They put me in the hospital. That's how bad I had beat up my body with drinking. And on the day that I got discharged from detox, my wife comes there with my 4 kids. And she says, "You're going back to Minnesota, you're going into treatment. I'm taking the kids and we're moving to North Carolina." And she left. She didn't even come home to pack. She just left right from Chicago and went to North Carolina. So my world was really caving at that point. I came back here and I went to a treatment center in Minneapolis, and I lasted about 21 days. I checked myself out because I knew that Kelly was going to come back. She needed me. She couldn't live without me. My kids needed me. There's no way that she would be gone forever. I checked myself out. I stayed sober for about a week. And it only took a little drive to a gas station to get a candy bar for my dad, where 2 doors down was a liquor store. And I had enough coins in my little cup there to buy 2 little mini bottles of vodka. And it got me going again. For the next year, I drank. That's all I did. I didn't work. I didn't do anything else but drink. From 6 a.m. till I passed out or fell asleep at night, I was drinking. Those big bottles you see in the liquor store, I was drinking a full bottle of that about every day and a half. That's all I was doing. I couldn't imagine life without alcohol. I had to have it. How could I live life without it? There was no way. So I did that for the next year. During this time, I know I was going to get indicted, I was going to get charged. I knew I was going to prison. I knew I was at some point. It was just not a matter of if, it was when. But around September 7th of that 2013, I was sitting out on a patio at my dad's place. I was living with him by this time. He had taken me in, a wonderful man. And I was sitting on that patio, and I was looking at this pond that he had in his backyard. And I'd just gotten off a call with my wife, or my ex-wife at that time, Kelly. And she said, Joel, if you just stop drinking, that's all you got to do, just stop drinking. I'm going to let you have more time to talk to the kids. Because at that point, I was talking to my kids on a Sunday evening on a speakerphone. That's the only contact I had with them over the phone once a week. She said, I'll let you talk to them more if you just stop drinking. And I was replaying that conversation in my head over and over again. Joel, just stop drinking. You get your kids to talk more. Stop drinking. I was telling myself this as I was drinking a vodka and orange juice. And I kept drinking and drinking as I was telling myself to stop drinking. It's what you call in my area of alcoholism as insanity. Repeating the same behavior over and over again and not finding a way to fix it. That's how sick I was. That's how sick I was. I knew what I needed to do to get my kids back in my life, but I couldn't do it. That's how sick I was. But somehow that day, God finally said, I've had enough of this, Joel. You're done. And God grabbed hold of me. And I woke up on September 8th, and I felt different. And I knew something had to change. And September 8th was my last day, the last day I had a drink. September 8th, 2013 is the last time I've ever touched alcohol. And as of today, that's where I still stand. I planned. A couple days later, I went to treatment again. Down in southwestern Minnesota, a little podunk town called Woodstock, Minnesota. You ever saw the movie Field of Dreams? You know those cornfields? That was my backyard at this place. It was awesome. God planned for me to be there at that place at that time. I had to be there. When I was in treatment, I learned a lot about alcoholism. To me, alcoholism was not about the fact that I drank so much. That's a part of it. But it's mainly about who I am as a person. Who I am as a man. And we went through the 12-step program there. We went through the first 5 steps there. One of the steps is taking a personal inventory as to who you are. And they gave me this Denny's menu of character flaws or character defects of a person. And they said, check off which ones you are. And I kept checking, and I kept checking, and I kept checking. Arrogant, pride, dishonest, all these things. It was me. That whole thing was me. I was a real piece of work. A real jerk. And it woke me up. That's not about the drinking, it's about my thinking. I gotta change my thinking. And for 45 days I got beat up there. They went after me. They destroyed me, they took me inside out, and they saved my life, these counselors. They absolutely saved my life. And I came home a new man. I came home a new man. The one thing I really realized is that what's at the center of my life? What drives who I am? What I learned is that I'm a very insecure person, just like my mother. I'm a very insecure person. Well, what comes out of insecurity? For me, it's I gotta mask my insecurity. I can't let people know I'm insecure. So out of that came arrogance. Out of that came lies. Out of that came deception, dishonesty, pride, false pride. What changed for me? I've been a Christian for over 40 years. I know the books of the Bible. I know the great hymns. I know how to be a Christian man. What changed? It's because I had insecurity driving me. I didn't have God driving my life. When I got him back into the center of my life, where he sits today, there's a whole new person that has come out of that. Humility, honesty, not being fake, genuine, authentic, joyful, hopeful. When I have God at the center of my life, that's what becomes of me. I can't go wrong when I've got him at the center of my life. And so for these last 3 years, that's what I've done. I've made it my mission to keep him at the center, to surrender to him daily, to let him challenge me, to let him steer me. He's driven this path ahead of me, and I just keep following. But life hasn't been easy the last 3 years either. I've gone through a lot of good, and a lot of tough. So around July 4th of 2014, on July 4th, 2014, I was doing really well. I'd taken a job at Caribou Coffee, a wonderful place that took in this felon. I told them everything about me. They took me in, and they hired me to be a barista and a team member, and I loved it. It was great. I was working at the drive-through window, and this blonde girl comes pulling up to the window. She's kind of tattooed. She's beautiful. She gives me a smile, and I just start to take notice. Come to find out that we have a common bond. Her sister, Michelle, was a friend of mine in high school at Mounds View. In fact, I took her sister, Michelle, to prom when I was a senior in high school. And then I talked about her parents, and I've known Sharon for years, and her dad, and we talked about that a little bit. And one thing led to another, and on the 4th of July of that year, Alicia reached out to me. And we just got to talking over messaging on Facebook. And we haven't stopped talking since. She knows my story. She knew it from the get-go. She knew what was ahead, and she knew what I had done in the past. And she fell in love with me still. She chose to show me the grace that she didn't have to show me because she wasn't a part of my past. But she still said, I'm going to believe the guy that you are today. I don't care about your past. I'm going to take you for who you are today. That's a hero. We got married a couple months ago. I've never been happier. She has 2 kids. I have 4 kids. We have 6 kids together now. We were all together at this wedding. She's a beautiful, beautiful soul. And she has been a part of the saving of my life. I love her. Another hero in my life is my father. You talk about a man of grace. You talk about a man of forgiveness. You talk about a man who never gave up on me. I talked to you about the 13 victims that I had, the $1.some million that I took. My father was one of my victims. In fact, he was my largest victim of who I took from. When my mother passed away, he couldn't handle the finances. He didn't know anything about money. He didn't care anything about money because Mom took care of all that. And he asked me to take over, this son that he trusted. He asked me to take over. And I started taking from him. And taking from him and led him to believe that everything was fine when he was completely running out of money. And that was a tough day for him in 2012 when I got sent to detox and he realized that he was broke. All he had was a home. What does he do? He comes and sees me in detox, puts his arm around me, and says, we're going to get through this together. I forgive you. I forgive you. Right around the time that Alicia and I started dating in July of 14, about 2 weeks after that, Dad hadn't been feeling very well. His stomach had been hurting. And he had gone through so many trials with his knees lately. It was a real mess what he had gone through, but his stomach was hurting. It was bad. We finally got him to go to the doctor. And of course, the news couldn't have been any worse. He had a tumor in his pancreas, on his pancreas, and it was terminal. And they gave him about 6 months to live. And I tell you, he made it 3 months. He died October 28th of that year. Those were 3 of the most beautiful months I've ever spent with someone. You talk about learning from someone who could have ran away, who could have said, I can't deal with this son of mine who stole from me, who I trusted. But that man taught me about forgiveness. It's an interesting thing when you've been forgiven and when you've been given grace, you understand what it's like to give it and to give it back to others. I haven't experienced grace from everyone that I'd like to experience it from, but that's okay. I've also been able to give grace and give forgiveness to a lot of people too, because my father modeled that to me. He is a hero of my story. He's an absolute hero of my story. I have friends here. I have family here. My wife here. My mother-in-law here. They're heroes to me. They believed in me. I can't say enough about what that means to me, to have gone through what I've gone through, to have done what I did. Because the story doesn't end again. March 3rd of 2015, I started my prison sentence. I got sentenced to 42 months in prison up at Duluth Federal Penitentiary, federal camp. And I left there on the 3rd of March with a ton of support and a ton of love, but also a ton of fear. My kids were so supportive, but scared. I was very, very scared, not knowing what to expect. But I went and I decided that I'm either going to count my time or I'm going to make my time count. It was my choice. And I chose to make my time count. I was there for 19 months. I participated in a drug and alcohol program up there that when I completed it after 10 months, I was given a year off of my sentence. And so I was able to come home 19 months later on September 20th, just a couple months ago. While up there, I spent a lot of time with God. I spent a lot of time in the chapel. I actually worked in the chapel too, so I got to be in there a lot. I was able to start a Bible study up there. I worked with another 6 guys. We went through a year-long Bible study together.